The moment when a room full of banking professionals realizes they've made the worst mistake of their careers. Marcus Wellington stood tall in the marble-floored lobby of Meridian Financial, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "I'm the CEO and majority owner of Meridian Financial Group," he announced, his words landing like thunder in the suddenly airless room. The branch manager, Richard Harrington, who seconds earlier had been smugly denying Marcus service, now looked like he'd seen a ghost. His face drained of color so quickly you could almost hear the blood rushing from his head. That's impossible," he stammered, the polished veneer of superiority cracking with each syllable. But how did this powerful black executive end up being discriminated against in his own bank? And what happens when a man who's fought prejudice his entire life finally gets the chance to challenge it from a position of power? Let me take you back to where it all began. Marcus Wellington wasn't born into wealth or privilege. The son of a postal worker and a nurse, he grew up in a modest neighborhood where financial institutions were scarce but predatory lenders were plentiful. His father would often return from attempting to secure loans with his shoulders slumped, his dignity stripped away by condescending bankers who never quite said it was because of his skin color. "We'll find another way," his father would say, the forced optimism fooling no one. Young Marcus absorbed these lessons, his brilliant mind already calculating the injustice of the invisible barriers surrounding his community. By 16, Marcus was already exceptional with numbers, earning a full scholarship to Wharton. Even there, the obstacles never ceased. His white classmates assumed he was there to fill a quota. His professors seemed surprised when he outperformed everyone else. During internship interviews, he watched less qualified candidates get selected ahead of him, their family connections worth more than his perfect GPA. But Marcus had inherited his father's determination. Each rejection only fueled his resolve. When Wall Street initially shut its doors, he started his own investment advisory firm focused on underserved communities. When he sought funding, investors questioned his ability to succeed despite his impeccable business plan. Through sheer brilliance and relentless work, his firm grew exponentially. By 40, Marcus had built a financial empire that couldn't be ignored, even by those who had once dismissed him. 3 months ago, when the opportunity arose to acquire troubled Meridian Financial, Marcus saw more than a business opportunity. His heart raced when he reviewed their lending patterns, the statistical evidence of discrimination hidden in plain sight among columns of numbers. Here was a chance to transform the very institution that embodied everything he had fought against. "I need to see it firsthand," he told his board when announcing his unorthodox plan. "No announcement of my face, no press release with my photo. Let me walk into these branches as a customer first." His assistant Elise worried about the emotional toll. "You've spent your career fighting to be recognized for your brilliance," she said, her concern evident in the furrow of her brow. "Now you want to deliberately put yourself in situations where you'll be judged by your skin." Marcus's hand tightened slightly around his Italian leather portfolio. "Sometimes the only way to prove the system is broken is to let it break right in front of everyone," he replied, the weight of decades of accumulated slights and dismissals evident in his voice. Today's visit to the downtown branch wasn't random. Their rejection rates for minority loan applications were 60% higher than average. The data suggested systematic discrimination, but data could be explained away. Marcus needed irrefutable proof, even if it meant becoming the victim one more time. What Marcus couldn't know as he straightened his deliberately modest tie that morning was that today's confrontation would uncover something far more sinister than one prejudiced branch manager. Something that would put everything he'd built, and possibly his life, at risk. Are you ready to see what happens when a lifetime of experiencing discrimination meets the power to finally do something about it? Because Marcus Wellington was about to show the banking world exactly who they'd been underestimating. The morning sun glinted off the glass facade of Meridian Financial as Marcus Wellington straightened his deliberately modest tie. Gone were the custom Italian suits and the luxury watch. Today, he wore a simple blazer from a department store, nice enough to be respectable, not impressive enough to command immediate respect. "Remember, sir," Elise whispered as they approached the entrance, "nobody at this branch knows who you are." Marcus nodded, a slight smile playing at his lips. That's the point, he replied, his shoulders squaring as if preparing for battle. The moment Marcus stepped through the revolving doors, he felt it. That subtle shift in the atmosphere that every black person recognizes. The security guard's gaze lingering a beat too long. The teller's smile tightening just slightly as she assessed his appearance. These microaggressions were so familiar they almost felt like old acquaintances. Marcus approached the customer service desk where a young woman greeted him. Her name tag read, Aisha. "I'd like to discuss investment options," he said, deliberately keeping his voice casual despite the Harvard education that had polished his diction decades ago. "Of course, sir. Let me get our branch manager, Mr. Harrington." Aisha replied with genuine warmth that stood out among the cooler reception from others. While waiting, Marcus observed a white couple being escorted to a private office by another advisor. The man wore scuffed shoes and a suit that had seen better days. Yet the staff's body language communicated nothing but respect. The contrast wasn't lost on Marcus. He'd spent a lifetime documenting these discrepancies. First in his mind, later in business plans designed to disrupt them. Minutes later, a balding man with a forced smile approached. Richard Harrington's eyes flicked over Marcus, lingering on his skin before his smile tightened into something that barely qualified as professional courtesy. "I understand you're interested in investment options," Harrington said coolly. "Do you currently have an account with us?" His tone suggested he already knew the answer, or rather, had decided on the answer regardless of reality. "I have several accounts," Marcus replied, the truth of this statement, that he literally owned every account in the building, sitting like a delicious secret on his tongue. "But I'm more interested in discussing your premium investment portfolios today." The change was subtle but unmistakable. Harrington's posture shifted, creating just slightly more distance between them. "Those portfolios have minimum investment requirements of $500,000. He explained with thinly veiled condescension. "Perhaps I could interest you in our more accessible options?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Several employees nearby stopped what they were doing, heads turning subtly. Marcus recognized the moment for what it was, not just discrimination against him, but a performance for the staff, reinforcing the unwritten rules about who deserves what level of service. "I'm aware of the requirements," Marcus said evenly, his calm exterior masking the familiar burn of indignation. "I'd still like the premium portfolio information." Harrington's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing. Marcus had seen this look countless times, the calculation happening behind those eyes, trying to determine if this was someone who could cause trouble or someone who could be safely dismissed. "Sir, these investments are typically for our established clientele," Harrington continued, each word dripping with implication. "Perhaps if you'd like to start with a basic savings account." "Is there a problem with showing me the premium options?" Marcus interrupted, his voice dangerously soft. The question hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown. Marcus watched as a white customer entered and was immediately greeted with enthusiasm by another advisor. Without hesitation, the man was offered a beverage and escorted to a private consultation room. No questions about minimum balances. No suggestions to consider more accessible options. The contrast couldn't have been clearer if it had been staged. "Look," Harrington sighed theatrically, "to save us both time, these investments require extensive financial verification. Our premium clients typically come recommended by..." "By whom, Mr. Harrington?" Marcus asked, leaning slightly forward, inviting the manager to complete the thought. "By people we know," Harrington replied, emphasizing the "we" with a smug smile that spoke volumes. It was the oldest code in the book. We didn't include people who looked like Marcus. A heavy silence fell. Aisha, who had first greeted Marcus, looked mortified, while another employee had gone pale. This was the moment Marcus had been waiting for, the mask slipping to reveal the ugly truth beneath. "I see," Marcus said, his voice level despite the storm brewing inside him. "And what makes you think you don't know me, Mr. Harrington?" The manager's smirk wavered slightly. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice as if sharing a confidence between gentlemen. "Certain investments just aren't suitable for everyone. There are communities that frankly don't have the financial literacy to benefit from these services. we'd be doing you a disservice. There it was, the final escalation. The blatant, barely concealed racism wrapped in a thin veneer of professional concern. Marcus had heard variations of this throughout his career. The implication that his community couldn't possibly understand sophisticated financial instruments. That denying service was somehow doing him a favor. For a moment, Marcus observed Harrington with the cool detachment of a scientist viewing a specimen under glass. This man had no idea he was committing career suicide in real time. No idea that every word was being analyzed not just as personal insult, but as evidence of systematic discrimination that would soon rock Meridian Financial to its core. Want to know what happened next? Because the next 60 seconds would change not just Richard Harrington's life, but the entire banking industry. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The weight of decades of similar encounters fueled his movements as he tapped the screen once before setting it on the counter between them. The display showed an active call with the name Meridian Board Meeting prominently displayed. Mr. Harrington, I've just initiated a remote meeting with the Meridian Financial Board of Directors, Marcus announced, his voice carrying through the suddenly silent lobby. They're listening now. Would you care to repeat what you just said to me? Confusion flashed across Harrington's face, replaced quickly by irritation. I don't understand what you think you're doing, he said, the nervous twitch at the corner of his eye betraying his confident tone. Marcus Wellington, Marcus said, extending his hand across the marble countertop. CEO and majority owner of Meridian Financial Group. The transformation in Harrington's expression was instantaneous and absolute, like watching a man who just realized he'd stepped off a cliff. His face drained of color so completely that, for a moment, Marcus wondered if he might faint. That's impossible, Harrington stammered, his voice suddenly an octave higher. The CEO is standing right in front of you, finished a crisp female voice from Marcus's phone. And we've all heard quite enough, Mr. Harrington. The bank fell silent as employees froze in place, documents and transactions forgotten in their hands. A customer waiting at a nearby desk audibly gasped. Yet despite the chaos erupting around him, Marcus maintained perfect composure, his expression unreadable even as Harrington began stammering excuses. There must be some misunderstanding, sir. I was simply trying to— Ms. Chun, Marcus called out, addressing the regional director who had appeared on his phone screen. Would you kindly inform Mr. Harrington of our company policy regarding discriminatory practices? The woman on the screen adjusted her glasses, her expression severe. With pleasure, she replied. Mr. Harrington, your employment with Meridian Financial is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. As if summoned by her words, 2 security guards approached from opposite ends of the lobby. The power dynamic had shifted so dramatically it was almost visible in the air, like watching gravity reverse direction. You can't do this, Harrington shouted, desperation erasing any remaining professionalism. You have no proof. We have everything we need. Marcus cut him off, his voice level but carrying an edge sharp enough to slice through steel. But what's truly disappointing isn't just your behavior today. It's what the company data has shown us about your pattern of denying services to minority applicants over the past 5 years. A collective gasp rippled through the lobby. Several employees exchanged meaningful looks, the shared glances of people who had long suspected something but never had confirmation. The security guards now flanked Harrington, whose face had contorted with rage. This is a setup, he snarled, spittle flying from his lips. You people always play the race card when— The guards each took an arm, cutting off what promised to be an even more damning tirade. Marcus watched impassively as the former manager was escorted toward the exit, his protestations growing more desperate with each step. Tomorrow, Marcus announced to the stunned employees gathered around, we'll begin a full branch audit. Every declined application under Mr. Harrington's management will be reviewed. He paused, making eye contact with several workers whose discomfort was palpable. And for those of you who've witnessed discriminatory practices but remained silent, consider this your only warning. The lobby remained unnaturally quiet as security led the protesting Harrington away. Papers rustled nervously as employees attempted to return to their tasks, casting furtive glances at the man who had just revealed himself as their CEO. Marcus felt a tentative touch on his arm. He turned to find Aisha, the young woman who had first greeted him, standing there with tension evident in every line of her body. "Mr. Wellington, She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something you should know about the loan approval patterns. It's not just this branch." Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly, the first crack in his composed exterior. "What do you mean?" She glanced nervously at the other employees before leading him to a more private corner of the lobby. "I've been keeping records," she explained, her fingers nervously twisting a pen. "There's an algorithm in our system that's been flagging certain applications based on addresses and names. I think it goes all the way up to the executive level." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine despite the climate-controlled environment. A discrimination algorithm? Coded into the very systems of the bank he now owned? If what she was saying was true, the corruption ran deeper than he'd imagined, possibly implicating board members who'd welcomed him with open arms just months ago. "Have you documented this?" he asked, his mind already racing through implications. She nodded, eyes darting to the side. "Everything's on an encrypted drive. But sir, you have to understand, it's not just program discrimination. Someone high up approved this. Someone who knows exactly what they're doing." "Who else knows about this?" Marcus asked quietly, suddenly aware of how exposed they were despite their hushed tones. "Just me and whoever designed the system," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. As Marcus processed this information, a buzz from his phone interrupted his thoughts. An incoming message from an unknown number flashed on the screen. "Back off, Wellington. Some doors are meant to stay closed. You're not the only one who can make surprise visits." Marcus looked up sharply, scanning the bank lobby with new awareness. Who had sent this? And what did they mean by surprise visits? Even more concerning, how had they gotten his private number? His eyes met Aisha's, and he saw his own fear reflected there. What had started as an exposure of one bigoted manager had just revealed something far more dangerous. A conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of banking, and perhaps beyond. The question now wasn't just how to fix a broken system, but whether Marcus would be allowed to live long enough to try. Did you see that twist coming? Because the battle against racism just turned into something even darker, and much more dangerous. The news of Richard Harrington's public firing spread through financial circles like wildfire. By evening, every major business outlet had picked up the story. Black CEO exposes racism at his own bank, complete with security footage that had somehow leaked online. Marcus sat in his office that night, tie loosened, staring at the threatening text message while his security team traced its origin. "No loose ends," he told his chief of security, a former FBI agent with eyes that missed nothing. "Whoever sent this is connected to something bigger than one prejudiced manager." Down the hall, a team of trusted IT specialists worked with Aisha, combing through the bank's algorithm line by line. The evidence she had meticulously gathered over 2 years lay spread across 3 monitors. Loan applications with identical financial profiles receiving dramatically different outcomes based solely on names and addresses. "It's designed to look like standard risk assessment," Aisha explained, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she exposed hidden parameters in the code. "But look here and here. The system automatically downgrades applications from these zip codes, which coincidentally are predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods." Marcus's jaw tightened as the pattern became undeniable. The algorithm wasn't just programmed, it was learning, becoming more sophisticated at discrimination while maintaining plausible deniability. This wasn't the work of some rogue programmer. This was intentional, methodical, and approved at the highest levels. By dawn, Marcus had made his decision. There would be no quiet internal investigation, no discreet handling to protect the bank's reputation. That morning, he called an emergency board meeting. "Some of you welcomed me as CEO 3 months ago," he began, his voice steady as he surveyed the room of powerful executives. "Some of you knew exactly what was happening in this company and allowed it to continue." His gaze settled on Harold Winters, the former CEO who had stayed on as chairman. "And at least one of you actively created systems to perpetuate racism while hiding behind technology." The evidence presented over the next hour left no room for denial. 3 board members resigned on the spot. Harold Winters was escorted from the building, his access immediately revoked. By afternoon, federal regulators had been notified, and a complete audit of all Meridian financial practices was underway. But Marcus knew that exposing the problem wasn't enough. The real work, the transformation, was just beginning. Over the next 6 months, Marcus and Aisha, now promoted to Chief Compliance Officer, worked tirelessly to rebuild Meridian from within. The discriminatory algorithm was replaced with a new, transparent system designed with fairness at its core. Every employee underwent comprehensive bias training. Most importantly, Meridian actively began reaching out to communities that had been systematically denied services, offering restitution and new opportunities. The threats continued: anonymous messages, suspicious activities around Marcus's home, even a brake line mysteriously cut before a trip. But with each attempt at intimidation, Marcus's resolve only strengthened. The old guard of banking didn't understand that he'd spent his entire life facing down threats both subtle and overt. Fear was a familiar companion he'd learned to use as fuel. 1 year later, Marcus stood on a stage in the heart of a formerly redlined neighborhood, cutting the ribbon on Meridian Financial's newest branch. Beside him stood community leaders, employees, and Aisha, whose courage had helped expose decades of systematic discrimination. Today isn't just about opening a bank branch, Marcus told the assembled crowd, his voice carrying across the gathered faces. It's about opening doors that have been deliberately kept closed. It's about recognizing that financial access isn't a privilege. It's a right. The crowd erupted in applause as Marcus gestured to the renovated building behind him. The new branch featured a community center, free financial literacy workshops, and special programs designed to support local entrepreneurs. The transformation of Meridian had exceeded even Marcus's ambitious vision. Later that evening, as Marcus sat in his office reviewing the day's success, a notification appeared on his screen. The final report from federal investigators had arrived, detailing the full extent of the conspiracy he'd uncovered. 3 former executives were facing criminal charges. Several other major banks had quietly begun reviewing their own systems, fearing they might be the next exposed. Marcus leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The threatening messages had stopped months ago after 2 arrests. The banking industry was slowly, reluctantly changing. Meridian's new practices had even boosted profits, proving that inclusion wasn't just morally right, it was good business. But Marcus harbored no illusions about the fight ahead. Systems built over centuries wouldn't be dismantled in a year, or even a decade. The work would continue long after his time as CEO ended. The important thing was that doors once firmly closed were now cracked open, and with enough pressure they would never close again. As the sun set over the city skyline, Marcus thought about his father, who had been denied loans his entire life, about communities systematically prevented from building wealth, about all the brilliant minds never given a chance to prove their worth. "I'm just getting started," he whispered to himself, the weight of both progress made and challenges ahead settling on his shoulders. "Some doors aren't meant to stay closed, and I've got a lot more surprise visits to make." Remember this: sometimes the most powerful act of resistance is simply showing up in spaces where you've been told you don't belong. And sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is not just open doors for yourself, but make sure they stay open for everyone who comes after you.